sound financial decisions. Samuel and his guests are ready to take your call at 514-738-4100, extension 200. And now, back to the Money and Business Show.
Today we have former Assistant Treasury Secretary Dr. Paul Greg Roberts. My next question, there's a lot of things that I wanted to ask you concerning, but Dr. Paul Greg Roberts, can you discuss the triple bubble implosion coming to the United States economy? I know you write that extensively on your website, but can you share with us some of the discussions that you had?
Yes. Well, first of all, since the Federal Reserve is fixing the bond price, the bond price depends entirely on the ability of the Federal Reserve to print ever more dollars to purchase ever more bonds.
Okay.
So anyone who wants to clear out of bonds and dump the bonds, the Fed simply buys them to prevent the price from going down. So, in other words, the bond price is dependent entirely on the Federal Reserve printing money to buy up the bonds to keep the price high. Now, the Federal Reserve is splitting this $1,000 billion of new money between U.S. Treasury bonds, which means they're financing essentially half of the federal deficit. It's monetized, they're printing money. And between mortgage-backed securities, which means they're buying these things off the banks, giving the banks cash at face value for bonds that might be worth half that, if that much.
Wow.
Well, this means the bond market is a bubble. It's based only on the Federal Reserve printing money.
And buying.
Now, where does all that money go?
Yeah.
And many times, historically, it
the stock
gets
market
through the banks into the economy and drives up prices, and people have a hyperinflation. But in the United States, in this instance, it's not. It's stopped in the banks because they're not lending, because the consumers are so over their heads in debt they can't borrow. So what are the banks doing with all this cash that the Federal Reserve is giving them in exchange for their bad assets? They're speculating in the stock market. They're buying stock market futures. So just like selling a futures contract,
they're buying up.
Drives down the price. If you buy, it drives it up.
Right.
So the stock market is based also on the Fed's liquidity.
It's
the fact the Fed is creating money is the reason the stock market is up. It's not because they're selling more or the retail sales are high or the consumers have any money to buy anything. It's simply because the Fed is creating money, it's going into the banks, they're not lending it, they're speculating in the stock market. So that's the second bubble. And the third bubble is the dollar itself. We already touched on this. We said that if you're printing 1,000 billion new dollars, but the demand for dollars is not rising by 1,000 billion, then there has to be pressure on the price of the dollar. And we talked about how they have stopped that pressure from the bullion markets by selling naked shorts, and they have stopped the pressure from the Japanese yen and the euro because they have forced the Japanese